Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, The Benefits of GMP for the Cannabis Industry. My name is Eric Sandy, and I'm the digital editor of Cannabis Business Times. While the regulatory landscape in the cannabis industry is constantly changing, one area that will not change is the expectation for the production of products that are safe for their intended use. Having a recognized and trusted good manufacturing practices, aka GMP program, is an essential foundation for any cannabis organization that wants to protect its brand, reputation, and customers. That's why we're here today. Here's what you're going to learn. You're going to learn how a GMP program can improve process efficiency, reduce variation, and save money, how to prepare for industry requirements of GMP as a prerequisite in the future, and how to positively differentiate your organization, products, and reputation using a GMP certification program. Before we get underway with today's presentation from BSI, just a couple notes. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. And if you click that, that'll open the Q&A box. Please feel free to drop in your questions as the presentation gets going. We will reserve some time toward the end of the presentation for you to ask the experts and get your questions answered. We'll make sure to get to as many as possible. Also, just know that we are recording today's presentation and we'll be sending around an archived file of the audio, the video, the slides to all registrants via email. Very pleased to welcome this panel from BSI Group today, and I'm going to pass the mic to Jeanette Livchevsky. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone. So to begin, I'd like to introduce our moderators and speakers. Andrew, if you could, thanks, perfect. Our first moderator is Mariana Glavin. She's the Business Development Manager at BSI Canada for food, retail, supply, and cannabis. Mariana has 20+ years of experience in certification, auditing, training, and advisory services. She has assisted organizations and supply chain to identify, understand, and mitigate risks through the development and implementation of world-class, sustainable, and robust programs for agri-food and cannabis. Whew, mouthful. Our second moderator is me, Jeanette Livchevsky. I'm the Business Development Manager for Food and Beverage at BSI Group. I joined BSI from the Safe Quality Food Institute, or SQFI, as many may know it, where I was a technical affairs specialist and was involved with industry stakeholders to promote GFSI standards and provide in-depth technical knowledge to companies and certification bodies. I've also worked with the Grocery Manufacturer Association, advising members on the interpretation of the FSMA rules. Our fantastic speakers today are Andrew Cole, who is the Customized Compliance Manager at BSI Group, with over 27 years of quality and regulatory and solutions-based compliance strategies. He has extensive experience in GMP manufacturing and regulatory requirements. And as a skilled QMS auditor, he can leverage QMS data to establish baselines used for trending, forecasting, and eventual predictive analytics. And our second fantastic speaker today is Jennifer Lott, who's the Service Delivery Director at BSI Group with over 15 years of progressive experience within manufacturing quality assurance, as well as 4 years in corporate quality assurance. Jennifer exhibits strong people management abilities, which spans employees, customers, and vendors. She has a track record of reducing costs through training and procedures. And Jennifer is also very well versed in CGLP, CGMP, HACCP, and CFR laws, and has experience in product development, operations management, regulatory compliance, teams facilitation, training, research, and total quality management. If you can go to the next slide, Andrew. So just a few quick housekeeping notes if you didn't catch it just a bit earlier. All participants are muted, so if you'd like to ask a question or a comment, again, please use that chat box. The presentation today will be about 45 minutes with 10 full minutes of Q&A. And at the end of the presentation today, we'll send out a short survey and we'd love your feedback. Lastly, we're providing all attendees today with a complimentary review of your GMP program to help you identify areas of growth, maybe help to get started or to drive continuous improvement. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mariana to get us started and kick off what we'll cover today.
Thanks, Jeanette. So in today's webinar, our industry experts will discuss the benefits of GMP, good manufacturing practices, as it relates to the cannabis industry. By the end of the presentation, you will have a good understanding of how a GMP program can help you meet industry requirements, improve process efficiencies, reduce variations, and save money. You'll have the opportunity to engage with our experts and ask questions. Next slide, Andrew. Our first polling question: which of the following best describes your business? And you can definitely pick more than one: edibles and beverages, pharmaceutical, medicinal, manufacturing, cultivation, distribution, recreational, or other. And please use the chat box for the other. And the poll will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wonderful. So thank you for that. So Jennifer, did you want to kind of chime in to talk about where we're seeing the individuals at today's presentation?
So I see that we have a large number of our attendees are in cultivation, where we have some in the other, and I saw a comment about extraction and legal services. So in the cultivation, we will go into a little bit about good agricultural practices, which is how we manage the GMP or that piece when we're looking at agricultural. Andrew?
Next slide. Thanks, Jen. So we have a second polling question. How familiar are you with GMP? And just please pick one: not familiar, somewhat familiar, well-versed, or know enough to be dangerous. And we'll close the polls in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Wonderful. So we see most of our audience is definitely somewhat familiar. So this will definitely help our industry experts gauge the conversation and help us out. Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. So what is GMP? Now, when I kind of go through this, keep in mind that I have a tendency to minimize or reduce to the ridiculous. And I'm fully aware that the devil's in the details, but regardless, GMP, just as it states, is good manufacturing practices. So they're simply good practices that take into consideration risks or hazards associated with processes or products, as well as your facility, and then the controls put into place to reduce risks to, say, an acceptable or tolerable level. So if your company's primary objective or goals were scalability and repeatability, which, how can we scale up production while minimizing failure rates, and at the same time, obviously, taking into consideration consistently producing safe and effective product, you should really know what the risks are, and definitely have the controls in place, for those risks. So GMP kind of gives you a little cheat sheet, and GMP always has 9 basic core elements that target kind of where these risks are and maybe where the control should be focused. So the first one out of the 9 is personal hygiene. It's in every single good manufacturing practice requirement. And while you think personal hygiene, it should be fairly self-explanatory, but obviously what they're addressing is contamination and adulteration. Approved supplier program, again, because at the end of the day, you're always responsible for what your suppliers provide and then what you use. The definition of legal manufacturers, whoever name is on the product at the end of the day is legally responsible. So you're responsible for everything that your supply chain provides to you. Number 3, specifications and labeling. That's contents, tolerances, potency, and ensuring correct and accurate labeling. I think that recently, I don't know, maybe it was 6 months ago, there was a big recall associated with gummies. Some CBD gummies were mislabeled that actually contained, high potency of THC. Probably not a good thing. Forced a major recall. Non-conforming product recall, which is you need to identify, segregate, dispose of product in the event of a recall. You need to have a confirmed plan as how to trace, track, and retrieve product as well. GMP addresses premises, facility, as well as services. And that goes to contamination and adulteration again. Waste and pest control, which is contamination, infestation, and just basic good documentation, good housekeeping. Maintenance and calibration, because if your equipment and measuring devices are not performing adequately or accurately, consistently, you will definitely have variation. And lastly, training, because if your people aren't trained, they will not consistently be competent. And again, I know it sounds like a lot, but as the saying goes, how do you eat an elephant? It's small bites at a time. So now that we've covered, yeah, go ahead.
Just one comment about, what you were talking about there with GMP is that I like to think about GMP and risk assessment as being a house. And those GMP elements that you talked about, they're the foundation for the house. So if you have strong GMPs in place, the risk assessment and the risk you're identifying are going to be much more managed and mitigated because of those strong GMP programs that you have in place that support them.
Absolutely. Well, and thanks, Jennifer, because I used to describe, say, quality management system or documented systems as you need the documentation for traceability, because the traceability at the end of the day is going to pinpoint exactly where you need to focus your efforts and or increase your, effectivity or efficiency, right? Otherwise it kind of becomes a guess, and sometimes you can equally guess wrong as you can right. So. Yeah. So what GMP is not, I wish I had more than 45 minutes because I can talk for a long time on what GMP is not, but CGMP, for instance, GMP and CGMP are for the most part interchangeable. And it's always difficult doing a presentation with different degrees of, knowledge about this, but I was used to, thought it was funny years ago when somebody said, asked me, does the C in GMP stand for cannabis? And no, it does not. It stands for current. And the C in GMP kind of more pertains to the FDA, and the FDA governance. What they're looking for is continuous improvement. And when they say, current, they're really referring to an up-to-date systems and technologies. So CGMP is forever changing, and as I said, the basic core elements of GMP do not change. I saw cultivation in the poll. So GAP stands for Good Agricultural Practices, and that primarily focuses on cultivation and collection practices. State GMP, which is where we are at in the United States today, which is a kind of a state-by-state patchwork of requirements, and a lot of that pertains to not only GMP or elements of GMP, but also licensure, compliance, and enforcement. We all know it's extremely inconsistent. And then GPP, which is a Canadian requirement, which stands for Good Production Practices, and that focuses primarily on having SOP, standard operating procedures, a sanitation program, and a recall procedure, and then obviously application fees and inspection. I think that's self-explanatory. Moving on.
So how does GMP work, and what does it apply to? So we have listed here a couple of different areas that we focus on and we work with. And with food and beverages, when we think about GMP, we go back to Codex Alimentarius, and that is our guideline for what good manufacturing practices need to be in place. When we look at cosmetics, we are going to the ISO 22716 standard, which is good manufacturing practices for cosmetic products. Under pharmaceutical products, we really go back in this regard to an FDA standard, 21 CFR 210 and 211, that define how we manage GMP. In dietary supplements, again, we're leaning more heavily on Codex with dietary supplements because it's not quite a pharmaceutical and it's not quite a food, but we lead on Codex for that. And lastly, for medical devices, when we're looking at GMP, we're looking at ISO 13458 or 485, 13485, had to say it right. So what all these guidance documents do is it gives us the minimum requirements that you have to meet based on the type of product that you're manufacturing. So like Andrew said, it's suppliers, it's traceability, it's pest control, it's grounds and housekeeping and such, all those programs that help reduce the risk of contamination of your products. Next slide, please. So what are some of the benefits of having a GMP certification? Is that as I just mentioned, it's really going to help you prevent and control contamination and cross-contamination. And that's one of the biggest benefits I believe that GMP provides you is that, that reducing the risk of contamination to the products that you're making. It also has the scalability and repeatability. When you have a GMP certification, it also enhances your credibility in the industry. So whether you're a raw material supplier that's selling to a company that's manufacturing a product, or if you're a finished product manufacturer, you look to that certification to have confidence that the product that you're making is safe and that there's no risk of issues there because you know your suppliers are taking care of the things they need to take care of. So it's that, that safeness that we're talking about. It also really touches into, as we talk about safe traceability labeling, it gives you a very strong foundation that when you find yourself in a situation where there's a recall, you have the programs in place to be able to execute it very quickly, identify the materials that are involved, and manage it with much faster and less risk. Andrew, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. I was going to jump in because on that first bullet, when you look at reduced cost and batch failure, and what I think about from the business standpoint, because really, we're trying to look at this from a couple different angles. We've got the business standpoint, and we also have the safety and efficacy standpoint. But from the business standpoint and the ROI, what can or what should a GMP or a good or robust quality management system, how does that relate to money and savings? And if you figure that over the years, growers have told me that about 10,000 square foot of canopy puts out about, 4,000, 4,500 pounds of dried flower annually. And if you look at like market averages cost, it's about $14.5 million in annual revenue. But annual failure rates hover around 13%. So if you look at those numbers of 14.5 million, 13% failure rates, that's about a $2 million a year loss. So if you had a pretty robust or mature GMP or system in place, that GMP should provide or reduce that failure rate from 13.5 down to about 2.5%, which then reduces lost product down to about 370,000 from 2 million, or about $1.5 million a year savings. All of a sudden, that's very significant money and very significant savings.
Yeah, very, very good point. Y'all, we're going to move into another poll question. This one's going to ask where you would say your organization is with GMP compliance today. So we'd love to kind of know if you're just getting started or if you've kind of looked a little bit into it, but you really haven't actually started the implementation process, or maybe you're starting to write a few of your procedures, but you still are kind of looking for a bit more guidance on it. So just getting an overall idea of where you think your organization is currently with GMP compliance. I'll give you a few seconds to answer this. Okay, awesome. So it looks like majority or almost majority have just started to begin this process. Maybe you're doing a little bit of research, you're collecting a bit of data to make sure that this certification is something that you all need, that will be something that will be helpful to you in the future. And maybe you're trying to learn how to best leverage this certification. All very fair. I see some of y'all also have been making a little bit of progress. You've started implementation, but maybe you want a bit more training. Maybe you need a little bit of help consulting. And then it looks like a few of you all are ready for certification. That's awesome. I'd like to talk to the people who don't need no GMP certification. Curious your thoughts and what you guys have to say about GMP certification. Love to just have a chat with you later. So let's move on to the next slide. Awesome. So For those of you who are still unsure about GMP certification and or are curious about additional benefits certification, I want to quickly touch on those benefits, not only inside your organization, such as making your program lean by cutting unnecessary costs and building continuous improvement to produce that safe and high quality product, but I also want to remind everyone of the benefits you receive outside of your organization by having GMP to promote to others. So first, and an easy way to leverage your certification is that you're meeting your local state's requirements. For example, to become licensed in Maryland and within 12 months of licensing in Florida, you have to obtain GMP certification. But obtaining GMP certification isn't just to prove to your local legislation that you meet the requirements, it's also to prove to your customers, B2B and end consumers, that you're committed to protecting them and providing the best quality. So in the chance of a recall, like we talked about a bit earlier, which usually isn't a chance, but more of a when, unfortunately, you have a bulletproof process with GMP for what to do and how to respond. Recalls are the worst, and for as much as you can get in front of them, the better off you're going to be. So just this week, actually, there was a large recall in cannabis for mold contamination. And this is just to say that it's more common than you'd expect, and it's more common than any of us want, obviously. So don't let your company fall victim. Having a strong recall program in place will save you thousands. And once again, put your commitment to your customers at the forefront of everything you do. That trust in your customer alone drives high sales volume and positions your company's commitment in the market, giving you a competitive edge. I'm predicting too, from a long-term game, GMP certification is in the cannabis industry will become a basic minimum. So getting ahead now eases your future journey of growth and positions your company to become a top player in the industry. So with that, let's jump into the next poll question.
Thanks, Jeanette. So the next question is, what would be the main benefit or benefits for your organization from GMP? Do you meet regulatory requirements, demonstrate trust, better control of processing risks, cost reduction through process efficiency, or all of the above? Give me a few seconds there. We'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wonderful. So thank you for that. All of the above. Excellent. So we definitely see as individuals are becoming certified to GMPs and looking at other various standards that this is a really great place to start, a great foundation in terms of building that house and then branching out into other regulatory requirements or standards that we might have out there. So thank you for that. Next slide. So the next slide is Ask the Experts, and we're going to give everybody the opportunity to ask some questions that you have that you have some concerns with, and we'd definitely be able to answer those for you. So we do have a question here. So the first question that I have is, what are some of the key areas cannabis organizations struggle with when certifying? Jennifer, did you want to take that one on?
Some of the key areas that we find that organizations struggle with, and I think it's one that is becoming widespread across all industries. It's resource allocation. There just aren't enough people to get the work done. So it's identifying the resources to get the things in place and documented and managed the way you want them to. So that's one of the key areas that I find when I'm working with companies in the last year and a half.
Wonderful. So we got another question here. Do contract manufacturers need GMP certification? Andrew, did you want to take that one on?
Yeah, contract manufacturers, do they need GMP certification? In all likelihood, this is probably going to be a requirement or a stipulation from the manufacturer themselves. As it pertains to contract giver and contract receiver. Contract manufacturer being a contract receiver will probably have some stipulations and requirements for GMP, either compliance or certification, number one, and number two, that manufacturer, the legal manufacturer, will probably also be auditing, the contract manufacturer to determine a level of compliance, whereas maybe certification, can alleviate that visit and disruption.
Thank you. Jeanette, I have one for you here. How much does it cost to become certified, and how long does it take?
Sure. I will not tout myself as the expert, but I did want to jump in real quick just to kind of add on to what Andrew was mentioning in the last question about whether we think GMPs can go away or not. One thing I will say that I've learned in the food and beverage industry is that GMP is the basic requirements. I mean, that is the minimum requirements that companies need in order to be able to produce, in order to be able to sell. It's what customers are going to require from them. And many times than not, customers actually require a much higher level of certification, maybe like a GFSI certification or something of that sort. That's where I've seen a lot of talk about what's going to happen in the cannabis industry as well. So I really, truly believe that GMP is actually going to become the minimum requirement. And so as early as you can get on board with that, the easier it'll be for you to progress in the future. And that extra leverage you'll have over your competitors as well. And then just to answer your question, how much does certification cost? So cost depends on the size of your company and the products and processes you'd like to include in the scope. The audit itself is typically 1 to 2 days, and that will affect the cost too. I know, annoyingly vague answer, but if you shoot me an email after this, I'd be happy to give you specific costs based on what you're working with at your site for sure.
Thanks,
Hey,
Jeanette.
Jeanette, if I can add to that as well, if you don't mind, when you talk about GMP not going away, I absolutely agree. No, I firmly believe it'll be a requirement at some level, and I say that because I can't open a restaurant out of my garage without some sort of GMP or oversight, right, to ensure that everything is safe. No, nor would you want to eat there. I can't manufacture pharmaceuticals and start distributing them, and even dietary supplements, has their own GMP for CFR 111, cosmetics, they have their own GMP as well. So I can't see it going away. And then when we look to the future of infused products and such, I think it's probably on a fast track. And also when you talk about cost is a tough one. There's allocation of resources, there's size of the company. You look at internal cost and external cost. Internal cost to a company, you got to figure that a robust system, GMP quality system, shouldn't cost any more than say 2.5% to 5% of sales, and that should be about max. Companies have obviously built this in for the cost of quality, and I guess then the question becomes, are they spending wisely? So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I'd like to add into that when we think about GMP, as Jeanette said, it's the very minimum. And if you're looking at further certification or further compliance, when you have GMP in place, the next step you're ready to do is look at your risk assessment. So in food, it's called HACCP. In other programs, it's called HERA or HARM. And it allows you to take that risk assessment that you're doing and saying, hey, I don't have to worry about bug parts in my products because I have a pest control program and it's an effective program. So it's a risk I don't have to think about. And that's what your GMP provides you. And then once you have your risk assessment, with your GMPs in place, you're ready to jump right into a full certification, whether it be GFSI or any other standard that's out there, because you've done all the hard work.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we've got a couple of questions from our participants. So Doug has asked GMP versus CGMP. What's the difference? Andrew, Jennifer?
I think Andrew pointed out earlier at the top of the conversation is that when we think of CGMP, we're really thinking pharmaceuticals. It refers to 21 CFR 210 and 211. That is basically what CGMP is relating to. It's still good manufacturing practices, but it's at a bit of a higher level, and the FDA is much more involved. When we think of GMP without the small c in front of it, that's when we're alluding to Codex Alimentarius or any of the other guidance documents, whether it be EUGMP, that are out there to help us understand how we meet the requirements. Andrew?
Yeah, exactly. That's well said. again, if I were to simplify it, the C stands for current. The FDA looks at current as up-to-date systems and technologies, and that's all changing. It's forever changing. The C and GMP, those are forever changing as well. Where basic GMP, the core elements that we discussed earlier, those are static. Those are not going to change. So easy way to kind of describe it.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jennifer. We've got another question here from Kevin. If you're offering medical cannabis, shouldn't you obtain 21 CFR Part 211 and Part 210, being you're stating it's a medical product?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't mind jumping in on this because I years ago with legalization, of medicinal cannabis, as a segue to recreational up in Canada, I sat on a panel, and there was about 500 people in the in the audience, and I was stating that medicinal cannabis will be considered in some way as a pharmaceutical because you have an active ingredient that is causing a physiological effect on the body. And I swear about 499 people wanted to throw a rock at me when I said that. But I went back and I said, medicinal, you're actually making a claim. All right, you're making a health claim. And just like any pharmaceutical, it has to be it's some level regulated for safety and efficacy and consistency. Right, and then it's going to do what it says it's going to do, and that's primarily GMP. Is all the controls put in place? What could possibly go wrong here, and then the measures in which to reduce that to an acceptable level. I hope I answered that accurately. I should have just said yes.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. We have another question here from Jonathan. Will GMP be accepted for export to Europe, where they have more strict EU GMP regulations? Jennifer?
Yeah, who wants to take that, Jennifer or myself?
Yeah,
Either way.
A lot depends on the country that you're exporting to, but if EU GMP is the requirement, then EU GMP is what you must have. And it's a little bit confusing, is in order to become EU GMP certificated, you have to make contact with the body in the country that you're going to and arrange for the audit from them. It's been my experience with EU GMP, they're much tougher audits. And I mean this because you have basically registered pharmacists that are coming over and doing the audits for EU GMP. So if you need EU GMP, you need EU GMP. It's EUGMP, and it's a lot more involved than the GMP that we're talking about from Codex or from 22716 or 14385 or such. So Andrew, would you like to add?
Yeah. EU GMP, I always have to kind of raise my eyebrow when somebody says, hey, we're interested in EU GMP certification. Because in all reality, it looks simple, sounds simple. It's really not that simple, as Jennifer pointed out. EU GMP is CFR 210, 211, for pharmaceuticals on steroids. And that's a real easy way to put it. And now that being said, there are other strategies that exist in possibly how to go to market in Europe without you or your company yourself being EU GMP certified. I'd love to have that conversation down the road as well. It's there's different strategies, and if you well, I don't know. I guess it just depends upon objectives and where you want to be in the market. A lot of business decisions behind that.
Thank you. And we have another question here from Michelle. Why do you think some companies avoid GMP certification? Jeanette, did you want to take that one on?
Ooh, I'm gonna leave that to the experts, but I do have a few thoughts about it. But I'd actually like to hear from you all first.
I think that companies avoid it because they don't understand what it is and how to go about it. And it's just the lack of knowledge, I think, is a huge detriment to companies who are going there and they're trying to convince ownership that this is how we have to go to be better positioned in the market.
Here's why I think companies avoid it. I agree with you, Jen, but I think companies avoid it because it sounds incredibly overwhelming and time consuming and labor intensive and costly. And I think because of that, it makes the whole process very harrowing. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to just a lack of understanding and maybe not knowing where to go to get the resources and how to leverage what you currently have in place. I think a lot of times companies don't realize that you already have a good amount in place, or you already actually have a good understanding. It's just being able to put that down on paper by creating those procedures and then making sure to properly implement them. And, we can definitely help with that. But I think that's a big reason why companies shy away a lot of times.
Yeah, I would agree with all of those, and then maybe add human nature. The easiest thing to do is to do nothing at all. The course of least resistance. And to go, to elaborate upon, maybe a lack of understanding, thorough understanding. I think a lot of companies look at this as being incredibly restrictive, right? You're removing my autonomy, and it really couldn't be further from the truth. I know whenever I get that question, they say, "Oh, that's very restrictive. Too many forms and all that sort of thing, checks and balances." My comment is always, "Well, you wrote it. you wrote that. Why did you get so far into the weeds on this and overcomplicate it? It's really not the intent. The intent is identify risks and put the control measures in place, and and have some documentation for repeatability, and traceability. It shouldn't be that difficult. If you put the basic system in place, it should continue to improve, hone, and refine itself over time and become a living, breathing system, rather than a 3-ring binder sitting up on a shelf collecting dust for whenever somebody comes to audit or assess your compliance. Make it useful.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Andrew. We have another question here from Michelle. Do you think GMP certification would become mandatory for all cannabis products in the U.S.?
I think we've already touched upon that, but I don't understand how it could not. Mm-hmm. Even with the self-regulated industries like dietary supplements and cosmetics, the requirement, under the FDA cosmetic, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act still requires GMP. It's just kind of a self-regulated industry, but the requirement is still there. And at the end of the day, you have to sign an attestation saying that you have everything in place, that you comply. That's a legal document. So, whether or not I don't know what the level of oversight is going to be, but I would absolutely say that. Yeah. How can you not have basic GMP in place to ensure consumer safety, right?
Great, thank you. We have one last question here from Joshua. Is having an HVAC unit in a room as opposed to outdoor units that are being piped in a problem? Jennifer or Andrew?
Either or.
I think, as you were going to say, Andrew, I think is that it really depends on what the risks are that are associated with how the unit is set up and how it's operating. And when you look at that, then you're going to understand if there are any steps you need to take to mitigate those risks. So you can go either way. It's just what risks present themselves by how you choose to do it.
Yeah, that combined with a really good maintenance plan, for filtration, right, to stay on top of it, and the changing out filters and controlling filters, and and then you can also take a look at the environmental aspects of the room, and now you're talking about temperature and humidity mapping. So there's pros and cons, but at the end of the day, what are the risks?
Okay, thank you. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll try and get to them at the end of the presentation. On to the next slide, please. All right, so we had one other slide that I just wanted to talk about, which was some of the services that can definitely help you kind of begin your journey as you're looking to become GMP certified. We've got pre-assessments or gap assessments to help you identify kind of where you're at in the process, build out that kind of roadmap in terms of what kind of resources do you need to have in place. what kind of experts do you need to engage with to get the work done. So that's definitely a good starting point for those looking at, I've got a business in place, I've got a foundation, but I need some help from some experts. So you could definitely reach out to us and we can definitely support you on that front. In terms of training, we definitely have a number of different training courses that can support anything from kind of understanding requirements of GMP, how to conduct effective risk assessments, leading internal audits, and so forth. So those are just a few that can definitely help as you're kind of building out these systems and some of the checkpoints and balances that you need to have in place. So definitely can support on that end. We do have something called capacity building, and that's something that is unique to, say, BSI, where we work with you as much or as little as you need. So if you need a lot of support, we would build out a program that would entail training courses with some workshops, and then you go back and you kind of conduct what you've learned, put it into practice, and start writing your SOPs and your policies and procedures. And then that kind of continues on over a couple months. Really depends on the number of resources that you have in place to support that initiative as well. And then we can support as little as you need. So if you are confident that you've done your own self-assessment to the GMP requirements, you've kind of built out your own kind of roadmap to say, this is kind of what I need to do to get to the certification portion of it, then you kind of work towards that, build out your team, and close out any non-conformances that you have. And then the next step there is utilize us to conduct that kind of pre-assessment to your certification portion of it, where we come out and we assess. We look for any non-conformances. If you have any, you need to address those. So then when you do have that next step in terms of certification, you already feel comfortable in terms of what to expect during an audit, how an audit is conducted, what questions are being asked, what information needs to be provided, and so forth. And then once you get to the certification portion of it, our auditors do come out, conduct the audit for you. If there are any non-conformances, you do have time to clear those out. Once those are cleared out and closed out by your team, you get a certificate, and that certificate you can share with your suppliers, customers, and it's definitely something that can help you achieve the goals in terms of the certification side for cannabis.
Hey, Andrew, would you mind going back 2 slides?
Hold on.
Yeah, no worries. So Mariana just gave great examples of how we can help you. And I just wanted to add on 2 more quick questions. I'd actually like to ask this quick question first. If you had an online profile that you could store all of your credentials, certifications, photos of your site, supply chain partners, basically anything you needed for customers, and all you had to do was give them a QR code to scan for access to it, do you think you would use it? And the reason I ask is that we've been setting up these types of profiles for companies across the food and beverage industry, and the cost for them to have this has been literally as low as a cup of coffee a day. But I'd be curious to hear from you all about whether you might find it helpful in cannabis, if we could help you to develop a profile like this for your company and provide you with that unique QR code that anyone with the QR code can get access to your profile. And the profile will again list photos of your organization, your company's achievements, certifications, and really any other credentials you'd like. It's a really fantastic way to provide transparency to your customers. So we call this profile Verify, and it's been wildly successful in creating more trust in supply chain partners. Also, having this profile can reduce audit frequency from your customers, and it can make the customer qualification process a lot faster. So I'd be happy to send anyone a mock QR code after the call to take a look at your profile to see what it could look like. And I'd really love any feedback you guys have on whether you might be interested in something like that. Another question too that I had is, how do you prove the accuracy of the additional work that you all do with, let's say, sustainability or ethical sourcing or something of that sort? I mean, sure, anyone can slap on a label to say sustainable or 100% sourced from X, Y, or Z, but how do you measure that and prove it right now? And I ask this question as well because we work with a myriad of companies to measure and manage important aspects of their process that ultimately help differentiate them from competitors. So for example, we work with hemp farmers to quantify their carbon emissions and other greenhouse gases to report offset and potentially even use that for exploring carbon credits. But we also work with food and beverage companies to help them measure their energy and water usage to then help them build a pathway toward producing and reporting. So the bottom line is, if you need to prove a statement or measure an aspect of your process, I'd really love to chat with you after this webinar as well to learn a little bit more from you. And really, I wanted to ask these questions to get you all thinking about other ways that we can help aside from just being a certification body. We're really looked at as a solutions partner, and then we can definitely do certification and training. But if I were to ask you, what are 3 things that keep you up at night? That's something that Neil Kuhl, one of our directors of America, says, and I'd love to hear what you all would say about that. And from there, we can figure out how to find a solution to your problems. Basically, I'm trying to figure out how to make your life easier. Awesome. So the last poll is really, how the heck can we support you? Can we help you with training? Can we help you maybe with a gap assessment to get an idea of where you currently are in your process toward GMP certification? Or maybe we can help you with a gap assessment to assess everything that you've implemented to see if you're ready for that next certification. Or we could help you with maybe working on bolstering your internal auditing, anything of that sort. We'd love to kind of get your feedback and just learn a little bit more from you guys as to where you are. Cool. Okay. So it looks like there's a lot of those who could benefit from maybe having a review of what you currently have in your GMP program. We can definitely do that. We've done that with a load of other companies. Definitely training as well. One thing that's really exciting is not only can we do kind of that off-the-shelf training, but we can do more customized trainings that are more specific to whatever your needs are. We can do private in-person trainings, online, in person. Again, you know, really whatever you all need, we can find a way to make one. Cool. Okay. Andrew, can you move to the next slide?
I think that's it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. And we'd love to follow up with you after this webinar to schedule a complimentary GMP program review or just chat about those issues in your company that keep you up at night.
Thank you. Sincerely enjoyed.
Yeah, I'd like to, this is Eric Sandy again from Cannabis Business Times. Certainly want to thank the BSI panel for that presentation. You know, I did notice over those last few slides there that a lot of folks were chiming in with either a request to get in touch with the BSI crew or even a specific thing they'd like to talk about. So we're going to make sure to make those connections after this presentation, of course. If you'd like to be connected with the BSI panel today, please add your name into the chat real quick, or any specific information that you would like to note. But yes, I think we covered some really fantastic ground here, and really appreciate everything from the panel today.
Thank you. Happy to circle back on any and all of the unanswered questions.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks so much.